The jester at the fair stopped the fight with a single movement, showed his battle scars, and lifted the marshal's iron badge from under the bells. The crowd fell silent, as if the wind had died down at the very flags. Hello to everyone listening. Tell me where you are watching this video from. Write in the comments, I'm really curious. Enjoy listening. On the outskirts of the settlement, where there was a moat and a palisade, a fair was held once a year. From early morning, tambourines rattled. The smell of fried fish and pea cakes filled the air. Women haggled over the price of flax, and men gazed at the stallions as if they were a miracle of nature. Many people came that year. Knights from the baron's retinue from a neighboring castle, monks with herbs, children with homemade whistles, and a foreign merchant with a sharp nose and a heavy purse, whom the townspeople called Yusuf. He spoke softly, always appropriately, and did not haggle to the point of anger, but simply looked at the goods as if he could see how they would serve their purpose. In the crowd were the widow Agatha, her son Elijah, and little Mila. Agatha carried a gray shawl on her shoulder, which she did not take off even in the heat, old but clean. A small copper wedge, like a shard, was sewn into the shawl. Ilya pulled his mother toward the knife tray, and closer to the stage where the skomorok was jumping. The skomorok seemed shorter than the others, but he moved so precisely that the stick in his hand drew circles without hesitation. His hat for coins stood nearby each time, and the hat was never empty, even though he had not yet finished his act. He did not laugh like the other skomoroks, who joked incessantly, but worked like a craftsman. He performed a trick, bowed, paused, and scanned the area with his eyes, as if assessing distances. Behind Ilya, two men were arguing. One was wearing a brown jacket and smelled of wine. The other had a short sword at his hip, and was clearly a member of the baron's retinue. The argument was about payment for grain, then about honor, and soon the one with the sword grabbed the other by the chest. Agatha told her son that they needed to move away, but the skomorok had already stepped toward them. He knocked the guard's wrist away with a wooden stick so that the blade went off to the side, and the one with the wine survived. The skomorok raised his palm, and without looking at the crowd, threw a colorful cape off his shoulder. Underneath the bells were broad shoulders, and white scars on his collarbone and ribs. He pulled a heavy sign with a carved lion and 4 notches from under the ribbon. Someone in the crowd said they had seen such a sign on the commanders when the king was gathering his army. The guard turned pale and said he did not know whom he had touched. The jester replied briefly, without shouting, and that was enough. The guards at the gate noticed the movement and froze, and the loudmouths, who were already looking for a reason to start something, dispersed. To many, it seemed like a trick. But people who had seen war recognized the old wounds and the military bearing at first glance. He did not want fame, he wanted peace. He covered his scars with a cloak, and continued his performance as if it were all part of the act. However, he kept an eye on those standing at the edge of the square. The thin guy in gray who circled the stage twice. The woman with a basket of clay pots who hid her gaze. The baron's men who talked without laughing at all. Agatha bought a jug from the woman in the headscarf. The merchant said she was in a hurry, and asked Agatha to take the jug right away, without bargaining, because her husband was waiting for her on the bridge. She said this quickly, without looking up. Agatha noticed that the merchant's hands were shaking. Inside the jug was a small rolled-up bundle tied with white thread. Agatha thought it might be a note for the merchant's husband, and decided to return it, but the woman had disappeared into the crowd. Mila asked to see what was inside. Agatha told her daughter that it was not a toy. She hid the bundle in her handkerchief, and with that simple, straightforward gesture, she changed the course of the day. Yusuf stood by his tent and looked at Ilya. He noticed how the young man took the knife in his hands and tried it out, not like a hunter, but like a craftsman who values balance. Yusuf said he saw in the boy skilled hands and a mind that loved order. Ilya replied that he needed only a few simple things, a little iron, and 2 days to make what he needed. Yusuf added that sometimes simple iron can become a support for an entire city if the hands reach not for brilliance, but for precision. He offered Ilya a job at the fair, to put a wooden measuring bed in place of the tent, so that there would be no arguments about lengths. Ilya nodded. At that moment, the jester turned to them and looked at Ilya so intently, as if trying to recognize his features through the shadows. He lingered on Agatha's gray scarf and twitched slightly, like a man suddenly reminded of an old pain. There was little time left before sunset. The gates of the town were closed early, because the Baron had recently announced his suspicions. Someone was carrying secret letters and promising people easy prey if they opened the gate on the millside at night. The market was noisy, but some people were taking their goods away and hurrying their children along. The jester stood by the stairs to the platform and looked up at the sky. He told his assistant that he would perform one more time before the bell ringer Silan rang the evening bell. Silas lived in a guardhouse by the church. He was lame, with a twitchy hand, and children imitated his gait. He pretended not to notice the mockery, but he knew all the knots and ropes on the bell, because once his hand slipped and rang not on command, but in distress. Since then, he had never made a mistake. Agatha, hiding behind a herring stall, opened the package. There was a short note on parchment. Its meaning was clear. At the hour when the evening bell rang for the second time, people with white ribbons would enter through the mill bridge and do their part. The torches on the north wall had to be extinguished. Attention had to be diverted to the dance floor, and the barn had to be set on fire. Below was a sign, a thin fox stretched out like a strong man on a stretch. Under the sign was a short note about a woman in a gray scarf who would be given the second bundle. Agatha realized that she had made the most important move of the day. She had brought something into the house that she had not expected. She remembered her youth. Back then, when she was still a girl, she saw off a young man who was going to war. He was poor and didn't joke much, but he held his sword the way Ilya holds a knife, without playfulness, only businesslike. He said he would return. Then people came and said that he had been killed in an ambush near a pine grove. Agatha married a master leatherworker, had children, buried her husband, was left with debts, but kept the gray scarf and the copper wedge that the guy had once given her as a farewell gift, saying that it was part of a broken tip that had remained in his shoulder after the first skirmish. She carried this wedge in her hem for fun, and then as a sign that even what was once sharp becomes dull. The Skomarok performed again. He tossed sticks and caught them so that their shadows pointed to excellent escape routes if something went wrong. He placed his assistant at the edge of the platform and covered his palm with bells. He saw those who wore white ribbons on their elbows. He saw a boy light a rope in the smokehouse and extinguish it immediately, as if testing it. He saw the belated glance of a guard who had already realized that he had misjudged the man that day. And he saw Agatha with a gray scarf, who clutched a bundle and looked around for someone to give it to. Yusuf, standing in the shadows, told himself that the smell was wrong. The fair smelled of smoke, meat, fat, and sweat. But when a quiet, sweetish smell, like rot and incense together, appeared near the gate, it meant that someone was hiding a bundle of resin under their coat to light dry brushwood instantly. He called Ilya and gave him 2 short iron wedges, saying that it would be useful to work quickly now. He added that there were too many names in the Baron's debt book, a copy of which was in his chest, and if someone made a fuss, those names would rush into the darkness at the first signal. Ilya asked where the stranger got a copy of the book. Yusuf replied that the Baron had sold him not only batches of grain for gold, but also his debt papers, because he was running low on silver. Yusuf did not do this out of kindness. He told himself that debt was a rope, but that a rope could be cut if a knife was inserted at the right moment. He thought about this calmly. The jester left the platform and, as if simply looking for water, found himself next to Agatha. He told her that he had seen the bundle in her hands and asked her not to throw it away or give it to anyone until he said so. Agatha asked how he knew. The jester replied that he had seen a mark at the bottom of the parchment. Then his gaze fell on the copper wedge at the edge of the scarf. He quietly lifted the edge of the fabric and held it against his key, which was hanging on a string. The metal matched in polish and scratches. He put the scarf back and took a step back. He said that once, many years ago, in a house by the river, he had left a similar copper fragment to a girl who did not like goodbyes. He said that then they took him away, put him under the banner, and he returned years later, but to a fortress where no one recognized his face anymore, because scars and ranks change a face more than age. He added that he had lost track of that girl. Agatha looked at him as if she were assessing lies and truth by smell. She said that the guy had said he would return, and then she was told that he was gone. The jester replied that he was that guy, only a stranger to his own eyes. He added that he would not give his name aloud until it was clear who was a friend here. He said that what was happening around them was a trap, and her family was caught in it. He asked her to hide the children in Yusuf's shop and keep the bundle. Agatha realized that this was not a scene from the fair, but a scene from their past life, which had reached them with gnawed words. Silas, who had been pretending all day not to hear the screams, pulled on the thick rope of the bell and checked the knots. He remembered how his father had once taught him to listen to the air when he was a child. He heard a sharp, short rustle near the north wall, like the movement of a bundle of straw. He realized that a fire was being prepared there. Ilya found ropes, 2 beams, 5 wooden pegs, and a cat on a long cord, which is used to pull out the supports under the floorboards in Yusuf's shop. He said that it was possible to slam the mill gate shut by driving a wedge into it from the outside and detain those who crossed the bridge. Yusuf asked how he knew such things. Ilya replied that he simply did not like it when doors slammed without his will, and always looked for ways to stop them. Yusuf thought that the guy had a streak of craftsmanship and was a man who knew how to think ahead. He gave him a knife and said that if necessary, he should cut the rope, not the shoulder, because the rope holds more weight. He added that if there were any questions about debts, he was ready to tell everyone that some of the names in the debt book were empty, because the Baron had recorded the same measure of grain twice for different apprentices. Meanwhile, the jester stopped 2 women from the Baron's service at the stage. They wore white ribbons hidden under their sleeves. He said he could see their hands, and knew that white was not the color of celebration now. He asked them to leave before it was too late. One of the women smiled, the other turned away. He backed off, not arguing. He climbed onto the platform and performed his last trick. He let a coin slip through his fingers so that it disappeared. The coin fell at the edge of the stage, where a girl from the stable was already standing, Anna, quiet and colorless, who was chased away, because according to the elders, she was always watching the hooves instead of mixing manure. Anna twirled a woven halter in her hands and watched the crowd. The jester nodded to her. He had noticed how Anna, last week, when the team was training by the highway, had spotted a mistake in their formation and corrected the stallions so that they would not get tangled up at the watering hole. He had said to himself then that the girl saw movement better than many of the older ones. The first stroke of the evening bell rang out over the square. The crowd moved toward the gate. The smell of resin became apparent. Light smoke momentarily filled the air near the north wall. The Baron's men had not yet given the order, but those who had come with white ribbons were already moving along the mill. Agatha clutched the bundle to her chest. Ilya, with pegs and rope, made his way to the mill gate. Yusuf walked beside him, carrying a bag of empty clay molds on his shoulder, inside which metal pieces clinked. He told Ilya that if he saw the worst, he would give a signal, drop the bag, and make noise. Anna led the 3 merino sheep to a narrow street where traffic always slowed down because of the barrels. She told herself that if she put the horses across the street, anyone running with the crowd would be forced into the narrow bottleneck. The second strike of the bell was supposed to signal the people at the mill. But Ceylon did not strike. He held back his hand. He heard someone striking flint and swearing near the barn. He decided not to ring as the strangers had asked, but as his duty to the town demanded. He rang 3 quick chimes in a row, as was done only in times of alarm. The crowd froze. Those who were preparing the fire flinched and revealed themselves. The baron's men looked at their sleeves. The jester raised the marshal's sign above his head, no longer hiding it. He said that he had not ordered them to strike, but simply to stand and watch. He pointed to the north wall. There was movement there that could not be explained as accidental. At the mill gate, Ilya drove iron wedges into the joint between the doors. He slipped a crowbar between the boards and pulled so that the crossbar on the outside sank deeper. Those who were supposed to enter pushed against the door. One shouted that the rope would not come off. Another stepped back and stumbled over a barrel. At that moment, Anna brought the merino sheep and blocked the alley so that the runners bumped into the grain and froze. She said that she holds her horse the same way when her leg hurts, calmly, without jerks. Those who considered Anna a nobody saw how a simple girl stopped the fragile flow of people. One of the strongest members of the militia tried to push her away, but the horse she had trained did not budge. The militiaman backed away because he did not want to get kicked in the knee. The jester approached Agatha and asked for the parchment. He opened it on the platform and showed the fox symbol. He said that this mark had been seen in letters from the baron's castle when the royal scribe had checked the seals a year ago. He added that the suspicions coincided with the debts that the baron had distributed to the people like a net and was now pulling on the knot. Yusuf took a copy of the debt book out of his bag and raised it above his head. He said he had bought these papers from the baron 3 weeks ago for a hefty sum. He announced that those who had put white ribbons on today had their debts written off, because a rope cannot serve as both a noose and a leash, and the baron had sold the right to the rope along with the notebook. He said he was doing this not out of mercy, but for the sake of order, because the town, which would burn down tomorrow, would stop buying his iron. The people looked at each other. Those who had come for the dark trade lowered their hands. He made them not enemies, but witnesses. At that moment, the baron himself appeared at the gate. He was wearing a cloak with a coat of arms on his chest, accompanied by a detachment, but without any unnecessary pomp. He told his men that the jester had clearly overplayed his hand. He added that the marshal's insignia did not give him the right to interfere in the affairs of his land. The jester said that he was not interfering in the distribution of grain, but in an attempt to set fire to the king's property. He mentioned that the fox symbol matched the seal on the letter found in Agatha's purchased jug. The baron said he did not recognize the papers handed over by the beggar woman. Agatha raised her head. She said that she had once received a wedge from a man who promised to return. She said she recognized him because the wedge matched. The jester took out his key and, without making a sound, applied it to the copper wedge on her scarf. Several old men saw the match. They said that iron does not lie, because each wedge has its own mark. The jester said that his name was not important now. What was important was that he was responsible for order in the kingdom, and that the habit of listening to the fair was more useful than the habit of whispering in the castle. He turned to Ilya and asked if it was his hands that had blocked the gate. Ilya nodded. The jester said that a hand that holds a cat for support and does not cut a man's shoulder deserves respect. He asked him to stay nearby. The baron ordered his men to detain Yusuf because he was waving his book of debts. Yusuf calmly put the book down on the table and said that the purchase had taken place in front of witnesses. naming them from the shops and taverns. He said that the Baron himself had put a mark of agreement at the end of the book 3 weeks ago, in the presence of a scribe who was now on his way to the royal court. There were people in the crowd who confirmed this. Silas rang the bell slowly and hollowly. He said it was a sign of assembly, not alarm. People sat down on the benches, and the noise subsided. The Jester said without pause that in his early youth he had served as a squire to the Count, who had died under the grove, and since then he had lived as if every joke had a duty. He said that he was not a jester, but the commander-in-chief of the royal army, and had come here not for amusement, but to investigate rumors. He added that he did not want bloodshed in the square. He showed another parchment, a royal charter, giving him the right to investigate matters relating to fire and treason. The Baron replied that he was seeing the charter for the first time. He ordered his men to step back to assess their strength, but the strength was in the square, not with him. Ilya, who had always thought that his father had died of illness, heard Agatha say quietly that the man everyone could see on the platform was his blood. He did not fall to his knees. He simply moved closer to his mother and the man on the stage. He understood where his habit of holding iron as if it were part of his hands came from. He did not call the buffoon his father. He simply accepted that he had roots that ran deeper than he had thought all this time. Anna, petting the horse, said she could lead the merinos through the crowd so as to drag the necessary ones behind her. The Skomorok nodded. She led 3 horses out, and without saying a word, made a detour to the north wall. Those standing in white ribbons followed the horses like children. They thought they were going home. They didn't notice how they ended up in a corridor between the barns, where they could be counted and stopped. Anna stopped and raised her hand. Ilya threw the cat onto the top crossbar, pulled up the beam, and secured it. The crowd stopped moving without a fight. People realized that they would not be cut down, but simply counted and their names recorded. This turned out to be worse for many, but fairer for all. The Skomorok said that those who came today with a white ribbon could leave alive if they named the person who had given them the ribbon. Several named the man with the fox seal. The name turned out to be that of the Baron's younger brother, who was involved in buying and selling timber, and often spent the night at the mill. The Baron lowered his eyes but said nothing. He realized that a shadow had been standing next to him all night. At that moment, something happened that everyone remembered. Off to the side, near the tent with Meade, stood the same guard who had grabbed the man earlier that day. He pulled out a knife. He decided that now was the time to get rid of Yusuf, because debt books without an owner were just blank sheets of paper. He took a step, but Silan, who had been pulling on a thin rope the whole time, threw it onto the bell and pulled it sharply. The ringing hit his ears. The guard, stunned, froze and missed his moment. The Jester took 2 steps in that moment and stopped him with his elbow. He did not draw his weapon. He simply laid the man on the ground. The crowd exhaled. The people who had mocked the lame bell ringer saw how he had saved the merchant, who, in turn, had already saved them from long captivity. They remembered how an underestimated man made a precise move at the right moment. Yusuf said loudly for everyone to hear that he was returning half of the debts right now and tearing up the papers in front of everyone, and leaving the other half for a year without interest if there were no arson or violence until the next fair. He added that those who had accepted the white ribbons were obliged to help rebuild the north wall, otherwise there would be no write-off. It was not a gift, but a contract. The people understood and nodded. Justice did not come as a gift. It came as work. The Baron stood pale and thought about how to get out of this trap. Skomorok said he had a choice: wait for the royal court and answer for the fox seal, or name his younger brother, if it was true that he had acted without his knowledge. The Baron said that his brother had long acted on his own accord, and that he had not ordered a single fire. He added that he was ready to hand over the keys to the warehouse and give the men up for questioning, but asked that his reputation be spared. The jester replied that reputation was not a coat of arms, but a way of behaving, and that those who chose fire at night lost their reputation in the light of day. He said he would not chop the Baron down in the square, because the bell had rung differently today. He suggested that the Baron stay and wait for the scribe, and that his younger brother tie his hands with white ribbon and sit by the platform. The brother tried to run, but Anna blocked the narrow exit with her horses. Silan pulled the rope, and the sound of the bell stopped the flight, like water stops sand. The younger brother sat down. He said quietly that he did not think the letter would accidentally end up in the wrong place. He said he had entrusted the package to a merchant who had mixed up the scarves. Agatha realized that her everyday purchase had turned the whole day around. But it was no accident. The jester had seen the white ribbons in advance. Yusuf had bought the debts in advance. Ilya had made the wedges in advance, and Silan had held the rope in advance. Their choices came together in a single line. Night came quickly, but there was no fire. The flames they had prepared remained as embers in a wet pit. People dispersed to their homes, but many remained in the square. The Skomorok took off his cap and placed it on the edge of the stage, as if forever. He did not ask for coins. He said that now was the time to untie the knots. He asked Yusuf to open the book and read the names. Yusuf read calmly. He named the debtors, and then announced that each name now had a new entry: consent to work on strengthening the wall and to honest measurement of grain. He said that from that day on, no one would argue about length, because tomorrow Elijah would put up a wooden measuring rack and insert an iron bar into it, so that there would be less arguing and more measuring. People listened and thought that a simple thing could keep a lot of shouting at bay. Agatha stood next to the platform and held a handkerchief. For the first time in many years, she did not hide the copper wedge. She did not cry. She remembered that night by the river, when the one who had now become the chief said that he did not know how to speak, but he knew how to take a blow. She thought that life had given him all the glimmers of blows. She did not demand words of love, and did not ask for anything for herself. She just stood nearby, because now it was clear why her son held iron the way he did. The Skomorok approached her, but did not touch her. He said he could no longer be a mask. He added that he would leave in the morning, because business awaited him in the capital. He asked if Ilya could come to the north wall tomorrow and show him how he would set up the measuring bed. Ilya nodded. The Skomorok said that he had a boy like that in his yard, who saw the tree, and not just the board, and that such people were needed. He did not say anything loud about blood. He said quietly that bone recognizes bone without shouting. That was enough. Yusuf approached Silan and put a leather glove on his hand so that the friction of the rope would not cut into his skin. He thanked him as one thanks a private in the ranks, without bowing, but with understanding. He said he would buy him the best grease for lubricating the knots. Silas smiled like a child and replied that it would come in handy. The people who had mocked his limp lowered their heads. They came over and brought him a piece of smoked meat and a barrel of water. The next day, the children stopped mimicking his gait, because their fathers said that this gait had held the whole city today. Anna led the merinos back to the stable and stroked their necks. She did not expect praise, but the knight's groom approached her. He said that his squad would be empty without someone who could see the way. Anna replied that she did not know how to speak beautifully, but she knew how to hold the reins and understand when a horse was frightened. The groom said that was enough. The jester overheard them and remarked that girls with such a gift were rare. He said that in the morning he would write a note to the captain of the city guard, asking them to take Anna to watch over the departure. He added that anyone could take off a mask if there was a reason to do so. Anna nodded. She did not argue. She knew that her life was changing, not because of luck, but because she had put the horse in the right place at the right moment. The Baron and his younger brother were left in custody at the gate. At night, the clerk of the militia, who lived by the mill, came to them and said that he had seen the younger brother putting the fox's seal on the letters. He had not spoken during the day because he was afraid of losing his job and his home. He confessed that he had been led astray. The Jester said that a house is more valuable than honor only until the bell strikes your head. He added that in the morning he would write down the confession and send it with the Baron to the capital. He did not smile. He simply did what he considered to be the right thing to do. Ilya fell asleep on a bench in Yusuf's shop. Agatha sat next to him. Yusuf brought them a warm cloak. He said he knew the price of the night air. He added that he did not like the cold. Agatha thanked him and asked why he had risked his money for strangers. Yusuf replied that once, far away, he had seen a market burn down. He said that after a fire, people argue for a long time about the price of flour, and this destroys cities worse than any war. He added that it is more profitable to help before the fire than to count pennies afterwards. Agatha realized that he was no saint, but his account was more honest than the prayers of strangers. She told him that she was not thanking his wallet, but his head, because his head had stopped the disaster. Yusuf nodded. He was not used to praise and did not seek it. The morning was dry. People dispersed, some to the fields, others to the walls. Ilya and Anna were already standing by the north wall. Ilya pulled out a string, marked the distance with his shoulder, and drove in the first wedge. Anna held a mixture of clay to fill the gaps. Silan handed them a rope. Yusuf brought a measuring stick he had carved during the night. Skomarok arrived later. He walked quietly, wearing a simple gray cloak. He no longer wore bells. He watched what his people were doing, both his relatives and strangers. He told himself that he had nothing more to do here, because now there was work to be done without him. He approached Agatha and told her he was leaving. He added that he was not asking for anything. Agatha replied that she was not giving him anything either, except for a look that contained neither demanding pity nor empty enthusiasm. She said that if he ever came back, there would be bread for him. He nodded. He turned to Ilya and said that if he decided to come to the capital, he should bring this iron bar with him, because it was his name better than any words. He added that a man's name is what he does with his hands. Yusuf spread out pieces of torn debt notes in front of the people in the square. He said that anyone who saw their name could take that piece and throw it into the water. He added that it was better to give debts to the river than to fire. People came up and threw them in. Some did it quickly, some slowly. Some couldn't find their names and complained. Yusuf explained that not all debts could be forgiven at once, otherwise no one would work. He said this calmly. The Skomarok listened and understood that his task today was to bring different minds into one order. He told himself that this was more difficult than any battle. The Baron and his brother were taken away under guard. The scribe carried a scroll in front of them. Skomarok walked alongside, but slightly to the side. He did not want to lead those who had fallen ahead of everyone else. He believed that the path to court should be quiet. On the way out of the city, people did not throw stones. They just watched. They remembered that fire could be held without a blade if the ropes and heads were held tightly. By evening, the fair was back to normal. Children were shouting at the stalls. Women were arguing about the price of flax. Men were dragging barrels. But something in the air had changed. No one was in a hurry to get into a fight. Anna stood at the gate and looked at the track. She was put there to watch the exit, as the Jester had promised. Yusuf opened his tent and sold Ilya iron cheaper than usual. Ilya said he would make up the difference with his work. Yusuf replied that he was counting on it. In the evening, before leaving, the Jester climbed onto the platform once more, but not for a performance. He said he wanted to say a few words, without embellishment. He reminded everyone that a mask does not always hide a coward. Sometimes it helps the cause for a time. He added that those who are accustomed to hiding behind other people's names will sooner or later fall into a pit of their own words. He said that justice is not thunder, but consistency. He asked people to exercise restraint, not only in grain, but also in shouting. People listened to him as they would a master giving instructions on how to use a machine. Agatha returned home, took off her gray scarf, and put it on the table. The copper wedge lay next to the key that Skomarok had left her for the time being. She did not know whether he would take it back or leave it. She knew only one thing. For many years, this wedge had been a thorn in her memory, but now it was just a piece of metal. It had stopped hurting. She felt relieved. She told herself that on the next market day she would buy a new jug and look inside, as she always did, but now without fear. She heard a distant, calm ringing of bells in her head. It was not an alarm, but a signal to live. That night, Ilya took out his plank and carved short notches into it. He figured out how to settle the dispute over the measure without words. He told himself that if he ever went to the capital, he would take with him not this piece of iron, but what he had learned to do: to stop the gate without bloodshed, to hold back the crowd without shouting, to repay a debt not with coins, but with work. He thought that this was his blood. He felt neither pride nor fear. He felt a calm heaviness, like a piece of iron in his hand that already knew it would become a wedge. In the morning, Silan climbed up the bell tower and ran his hand along the rope. He felt a new glove on his palm. He smiled and said into the void that now his hands would not hurt. He pulled lightly, and the sound was smooth, without friction. He knew that now the children would look at him differently. He didn't expect them to suddenly start respecting him. He was just doing his job. Yusuf was already packing the goods. He told his assistant that he would stay another day because he wanted to see Ilya set up the sunbed. He added that it was useful for him to watch those who worked with their hands, to remember who he was counting numbers for. He smiled. He was pleased not because he had saved money, but because he had avoided trouble. For him, that was the best profit. The crowd in the square buzzed in the evening because news had arrived. On the road to the capital, the guard had taken the Baron's keys and seal for safekeeping. This meant that the trial would be real. The people did not rejoice, but they did not curse either. They simply nodded to each other, like builders who see that a new beam has been laid evenly. By this time, the Jester had already left. He did not look back. He knew that the mask had been removed, and that was good. He knew that his travels would once again take him to war and to the king's councils. But he also knew that in the city by the northern wall there remained a measuring plank made by his son, and the sound of a bell that had rung not according to schedule, but according to conscience. He considered this his true reward. A day passed. In the morning, the laughter of the fair returned, but it did not hide what was important. A church servant said he had seen a young man standing by the wall, measuring the horizon. He asked why he was measuring the horizon. The young man replied that this was how he understood where his work ended and someone else's journey began. The servant was embarrassed and left. The answer was simple. It appealed to those who did not like empty words. And so, a simple fair day, which began with noise and petty family bustle, turned into anxiety in the middle and ended with clarity. The buffoon's mask turned out to be not a toy, but a tool. The hidden kinship did not come out of nowhere, because it had been prepared by small things: a copper wedge, the habit of looking at hands, a gaze that recognizes roots. The unexpected benefactor did not fall from the sky, but came with a purse and a head that calculated that order was more profitable than fire. The hidden talent of a simple girl bypassed status and led people out of a tight spot. The underestimated bell ringer became the one who changed the outcome without a sword. The everyday purchase of a jug turned into a threat for one act, but there was also a solution in the threat, because people chose not to shout, but to act. And so it happened. Final justice did not come down from above. It was not brought in a bag. It came from how everyone held their rope, their wedge, their horse, their book. The bell rang once, twice, 3 times, all ready according to schedule, and the air became normal, as it does after storms, when no one is proud, but many are silent with quiet relief.